Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, quick match gameplay. This time around I'm playing as the Dark Elves against the High Elves led by Arm Coops on the map, Spite Reach. And this time around we are trying something a little bit wonky against the High Elves by bringing a all melee build. And of course, shortly we will be getting Mortal Empires tomorrow. It should be hitting, and hopefully then we'll get to get some much crazier matchups with all the. I'm hoping that I do believe quick match should become combined at that point. So right off the bat, we do press onward almost immediately. So for my composition in this game, I wanted to do an all melee strat. Now, why all melee against High Elves? Well, the reason is that High Elves, while they do have skirmish cavalry, they don't tend to spam their skirmish cavalry. You won't very rarely see Illyrian Reaver spam. Actually, you basically never see it. And plus, this game has instituted unit limits, so you can't see that many of them. So they're only. You will, however, often see range spam from High Elves, and unless you bring shades and kind of play very skirmish, very kiting heavy, and very micro intensive, you're not going to struggle to win a shootout with High Elves as Dark Elves. Your Dark Shards will take much more fire than the High Elf infantry, who will get about 1 or 2 volleys in before you even manage to get into range, and plus their shooting units are much cheaper, so they can just shoot you down unless they bring in Loth and Seaguard, but even then they can generally trade with you very effectively. So rather than bring any shooting units, I simply decided to go all melee, and decided to just swamp my opponent, who I assumed would bring a little bit of cavalry, maybe a little bit of skirmishing, but mostly just infantry plus archer spam, because that is kind of the meta right now with High Elves. So for my front line, or actually I guess for my lord, I did bring Malekith on Seraphon, of course, with a few of his spells, no items. I think Malekith's items are pretty atrocious and not really worth bringing, or at very least situational. And that just makes it not worthwhile. Of course, he does come in with Gaze of Malice, which is a special ability, which is a decent decent breath spell that he can cast and does quite a bit of damage, especially on lightly armored large unit, kind of blobbed up units. Stand your ground, of course, for that AoE boost. Soul Stealer just to drain life, heal himself, and cause damage to enemies. Word of Pain as a debuff to enemy attack and accuracy. This was actually a bit of a mistake on my part, because I assumed that it would Word of Pain would actually affect an AoE. I didn't read this full description, and it does not. And even in Overcast, it does not. Then we do have Chill Wind, which is simply an AoE breath or direction or wind spell, which is an okay amount of damage and does provide a slow, mostly bringing it for the damage. And then because of course elves do tend to line up their infantry and have them pretty blobbed up. And then Power of Darkness, which potentially could be pretty useful, though I will not really be using it because I don't want to damage my own troops. Finally, of course, he does have Noxious Breath, thanks to the fact that he's mounted on a Black Dragon, and of course Spiteful Conjuration, which debuffs enemies when he's casting, which hopefully I'll be casting a decent amount at a time. And so for my front line here, I'm bringing a mix of Bleak Swords and Dread Spears. Now I'm definitely going heavy on the Bleak Swords. I maxed out, brought up 6 units of them, and that is because they do have higher melee offense stats. At 34 and 30 rather than 25 and 40. These guys are much better against infantry. And I'm hoping to use them to chew through the enemy spearmen and do an okay job if my opponent brings, say, White Lions of Krace, though of course against something like Swordsmen of Hoeth or Swordmasters of Hoeth, I'm not betting on very much. The Dread Spears are there to counter enemy large, a few in the middle just to defend if my opponent decides to charge straight down, a few on the flanks in case my opponent decides to try to flank me and get into my backline, get recharged into my backline. And then behind that we do have 4 units of Black Arc Corsairs. These guys are very decent, kind of grinding infantry and just shredding through enemies. They have very decent armor, which will hold up very well against High Elf spears and do okay against their arrow fire, and they will still trade fairly effectively with, say, White Lions of Krace. All being a pretty dirt cheap infantry. They have this bonus against infantry, okay melee attack, and once, of course, the Murderous Prowess kicks in, they'll be doing much better. And then we do have 2 units of Hargoneth Executioners, who are basically just there to kill enemy elite units, because of course they have armor piercing, bonus against infantry, decent melee stats, and they actually have Murderous Mastery, which gives them an even better effect with when Murderous Prowess kicks in. And from what I've gathered, actually, I've been reading some forum posts, it actually turns out Hargoneth Executioners apparently will out-trade many heavy infantry units that it doesn't look like they will out-trade, simply because of the fact that once Murderous Mastery kicks in, they become absolute monsters, and of course it buffs them much more than other units with the simple Murderous Prowess. You can see that these guys do get Fear on top of on top of their other buffs, which will be very nice, and it lasts longer. For my opponent, he'd bring a pretty conventional build, though definitely I think a little light on the skirmishing contingent, going a bit heavier in the infantry. For his front line, or first lord, he'd bring Teclis on his horse. Teclis is nothing good in melee. He's pretty atrocious. Even if he did bring a Sword of Teclis, which I don't believe my opponent did. He bring? Yeah, my opponent did bring the Sword of Teclis. He also has Canceling of Fury, which is a wind spell that does quite a bit of damage. Potion of Troy, which is self-regen, regrowth, which will be very useful at buffing his troops. And actually, it looks like my opponent brought all of his spells with Chain Lightning, Net of a Mintalk, Flock of Doom, which could definitely be brutal against my light infantry. Wild Heart, of course, to boost his power reserves and power recharge, and then Shield of Safri, which is ward save when he's casting. For his front line, my opponent is bringing 5 units of spears, backed by 3 units of archers. These guys are just the vanilla lightly armored archers, but that is good enough. They will still have very solid DPS, and armor's not that relevant when you can just outrange your opponent, which you can in the case of Dark Elves. Now you can see one of the very nice things about High Elves is they will open fire basically the moment they're lined up. A lot of other factions have a much longer setup time on their shooting units. For example, Empire crossbows, or even dwarven quarrelers and that sort of stuff takes a while to set up. The archers basically start shooting immediately. And that a unit of Phoenix Guard ready to sort of defend the back line and push in and reinforce the front. A unit of Silver Helms and a unit of Dragon Princes to give some cycle charging kind of power. And just an ability to kind of disrupt and destroy my backline if I bring a backline. And then finally out here on the flank we do have 3 units of White Lines of Krace. These guys of course are the cheaper armor piercing option for the High Elves. They don't have a bonus against infantry, but they do have armor piercing of course and decent melee stats, especially when buffed by that martial prowess, which I do believe is in general a better ability than murderous prowess. Now as we're going forward, you can see that my opponent has netted some of my units, but fortunately the core of these Bleak Swords actually bypasses the net, so they don't get netted. And I see it in time, so I move my Argument with Executioners around. So only the single unit of Bleak Swords gets side down, so nothing too tragic. And now you can see my Bleak Swords are gap closing as quickly as they can. My opponent does focus on the Black Arc Corsairs at the last moment, but I do manage to get the charge off. My opponent does not countercharge, something that you should always try to do if you can. I did try to cast a Noxious Breath on these Phoenix Guard, and because of the way Noxious the breath attacks are a bit wonky, it actually just kind of clipped the end of the unit and did very little damage. But something you always want to do if you're using spears and your opponent is just trying to break your spears with infantry, charge the enemy infantry. If you don't have a charge bonus against all, it's better to get even that 4 charge bonus than no charge bonus at all. And let your opponent get the full charge bonus. The only exception, of course, is if you're a Phoenix Guard with charge defense all, for example. But most units don't have a charge defense against all, so just something to keep in mind when you're using spear units. Now you can see my opponent just commit these Dragon Princes out here on the flank, and I do try to intercept them with the spears. You can see I'm pushing the Dread Spears in. They will not do well against Phoenix Guard, and that's just kind of to be expected. I definitely make a mistake here by not wrapping around these spears. You can see these guys get countercharged by the... you can see over here I'm casting the Chill Wind. I do dive in on these archers with good old Malekith, though actually it doesn't take a model in that charge. By the look of it, these guys are still at full HP, or full model count. The Bleak Swords over here are timing it out, but more importantly, the Hargonath Executioners are getting the mix, and you can see they're already raking in some kills. These guys are definitely very potent, even against armored units. Over here, the Dragon Princes, while definitely doing some number on the Black Arc Corsairs, are not doing that well against the Spears. And given that the Spears are much cheaper, especially. Over here, another net spell has gone down. Malekith, tying him down. Though my opponent does not disengage these archers, which is definitely a bit of a mistake. I do cast another Chill Wind, and I think this was a bit of a waste. There's definitely Winds of Magic that could have been better spent. I've committed my other unit of Hargonath Executioners over to this flank to tie down these White Lines of Krace, and just try to stall them out. In the meantime, I do rear charge with Malekith, just trying to get these Spearmen to terror out. Because I'm looking for a gap in the line. Now, I definitely made a bit of a mistake in not getting a full wraparound to get into my opponent's archery earlier. I'm definitely paying for it. Now you can see Malekith is simply getting focused down very hard. Over here my units are definitely getting a bit clumped, and I'm trying to loop around, and while these spears try to deal with these Dragon Princes. And they're doing an okay job of it. You can see these guys are definitely getting torn down the size by that massive spear, so the Dragon Princes do push through, at least in some areas, and they'll be able to get rear charges in. Fortunately, they don't cost fear, so it's not the end of the world. Over here, Teclis is definitely getting a little gutsy, chasing after Malekith, but Malekith will be able to just push clear. Teclis is getting a little obstructed by his own units, and Malekith is able to take off and fire off a breath attack on these archers, which will absolutely demolish them. It's very wonky, the breath attacks, though. Sometimes they hit very well, sometimes they hit very badly. In the meantime, you can see I'm casting a Soul Stealer over here on Teclis and the spears and all them, and that should heal up Malekith by a very hefty amount. If you can hit a big unit or big blob of units with Soul Stealer, it's a very nice spell to cast. Here I do recharge these spearmen. My simple goal at this point is to use Malekith's terror bombs to just break apart my opponent's front line, and once that front line collapses, I'll be able to push through with infantry against his back line. See, this unit of Bleed Source is already tying down these archers, and one of the units of archers has actually been routed off, which only leaves one unit of archers over there shooting. And granted, they are definitely doing a number on Malekith, but it's nowhere near enough. Very nice Flock of Doom does go down here. My opponent is capitalizing on this build a lot. It's very powerful against my lightly armored infantry, though not so much against the Hargoneth Executioners or the Black Arc Corsairs, who are really the damage dealers in here. Now my opponent does actually see that I charge Malekith in hoping to get a tear out on these Silver Helms, and they actually don't tear out, they stick around. And so I actually start taking nasty amounts of damage on Malekith, and I'm forced to try to disengage him. These Black Arc Corsairs, though, do disengage and start tearing through his backline. Finally able to get on top of that. This other unit of Black Arc Corsairs is chewing through these Silver Helms. Black Arc Corsairs aren't anti-large, but they do dish out a lot of damage, all things considered, so they will be able to tear through Silver Helms pretty quickly. These spears are not doing that well against these spears. Dark Elf spears are inferior to High Elf spears. I do get another chill win on these archers, just trying to beat them down. But as long as the High Elves' martial prowess is up, even their bad archers will hold out fairly well against low-end infantry like Bleak Swords, like Bleak Swords. This left flank is doing very poorly. You can see the Black Arc, especially with the help of my opponent's support spells like Flaming Sword of Ruin. You can see it's only really the Hargoneth Executioners holding things together here, especially once this charge from the Dragon Princess comes in. Hargoneth Executioners have already raked in over 100 kills, mostly against the White Lions of Krace, which is definitely very impressive. In the meantime, though, this right flank has largely collapsed. Now, this Phoenix Guard actually got terror routed, and so I committed the Bleak Swords to him, hoping to just pursue him off, but actually these guys do regroup, and now I'm going to have to mob him with the Bleak Swords. Fortunately, though, these Black Arc Corsairs are just chewing through my opponent's backline, chewing through his archers, and pushing off all this infantry that's been forced to flee. Especially when I got the activation of Murderous Prowess, that definitely helped me quite a bit. In the meantime, over there, Malekith is hovering around. I don't want to commit him. I did get a breath attack off on these guys, and I simply want to play a bit cautiously and not really commit him yet, because obviously Teclis is still around. If he gets his cast off, he can definitely do a bit of damage, as can these Dragon Princes, and Malekith is very low, and I don't want to let things fall apart. Now these spears are staying a bit exposed, so I hit him with a Chill Wind, so that helps quite a bit. You can see that armor dropping because of that debuff. These Dragon Princes are charging in, but they're not going to do well against Hargoneth Executioners. These guys might not be anti-large, but they will still dish out a lot of hurt to Dragon Princes, whose armor, while decent, and physical resist will just not save them. Over here, Teclis has popped his Potion of Chiroi, which gives him magic or damage resistance, and he's trying to duke it out with Black Arc Corsairs. He's not doing terrible against them, but ultimately he's going to hit his healing cap, and I can simply kind of charge him. Now what I do down here is another bit of a mistake. I drop Malekith in. You can see my opponent actually does get a hit in with Teclis, though it's nothing impressive because Teclis is very weak as far as damage is concerned. But I'm a little worried. You never know. I don't know what the cooldown is on his Sword of Teclis, and or whatever his sword is, his sword ability. And I don't want to lose Malekith and potentially rout. But you can see now my opponent's army is just kind of falling apart. My spears, which routed earlier, are coming back. You can see these back here. These Corsairs are still pursuing. Corsairs have very good speed at 40. It's not quite Witch level, which is at 44, and certainly not up to par with, say, Forsaken or War Dancers, who are at 46. But compared to most infantry, the vast majority of infantry, they're very, very mobile, and they can definitely shred through light infantry trying to escape. Now, the end result of that is a Pyrrhic victory, and definitely good game to my opponent. It was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun testing this build out against High Elves. I made some major mistakes in that game. Now, one of the mistakes was that by flanking Black Arc Corsairs, rather than trying to get him into my opponent's shooting line, I ended up committing him against the spears. Now, this did mean that the spears folded a little bit quicker, especially on the right flank, but it also meant my opponent was simply able to keep shooting Malekith with no real interruptions, except for when Malekith himself landed on top of his archers, until I breached the front line. So definitely quite a major mistake there. Because I easily had my opponent outnumbered on the infantry line of things. He only had nine infantry units, whereas I had an entire army of them. And even with the Silver Helms thrown in, I did have him outnumbered. So I should have been able to get into his back line, and I failed. Of course, spears do trade. You can see the Bleak Swords if needed some work, but you can, especially I do believe these guys were the ones who got in on the archers. Of course, spears, the High Elf spears, especially because of martial prowess, will actually perform pretty well. All things considered. Now you can see these White Lions of Krace. I think they're a bit of an underwhelming unit in my opinion. In most of my experience playing against them, I've never seen them do particularly well. I'm not entirely sure why that is. in this game they definitely got caught up against Harkonneth Executioners who even veteraned up from the fact, and those guys just chewed through them like a hot knife through butter. These guys of course have no sort of physical resistance. Their armor is practically worthless against Harkonneth Executioners, and especially with when Murder's Mastery kicked in, these guys were just getting chewed through pretty horribly. Phoenix Guard definitely did amazing work as always. They are getting nerfed in this next batch. We're definitely getting hit with some nerfs for some factions in the next batch, and one of them is the Phoenix Guard, and I do believe the Black Guard of Naggaron as well. The two high-end halberd units for Dark Elves and High Elves. Archers didn't do particularly well, but they spent most of the game focusing on Malekith, and you can see they actually gained a chevron, I do believe, and that was simply from focusing on Malekith. Dragon Princes did very well, despite being actually bogged down by spears early on. And the Silver Helms, in a surprisingly grindy battle, did actually okay. I was definitely a little surprised by that. Definitely a good game to my opponent, though. Definitely made some mistakes. I think we both did to an extent. But yeah, so it was a lot of fun. And tomorrow, hopefully, we'll have some new footage of some new matchups, I guess. As usual, guys, I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions, or anything like that, be sure to post those down in the comments, and I'll respond as soon as I can. I do appreciate you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye for now.